Hello, everybody. This is Frank with Iron Age News. It is Friday. Happy Friday, April 24th, 10:12 a.m. Sort of overcast Florida, but it's a little cool, so I don't have to have the AC on. Saving some money for all that extra prices we'll have to pay for oil. And we're going to talk about the war that's sort of sitting in the background right now and the many twists and turns that are occurring and why that part that we're discussing today is applicable to what is occurring in the Strait of Hormuz. There is no black and white warfare. Hasn't been for quite some time. We just don't go and stomp the other side out until they surrender. There are a lot of other things to consider while this is occurring. So we're just going to follow these questions. What if the war in Ukraine isn't just a war? Think about that. What if it is something far more unstable? It is a system where every move by one player undermines another and sometimes even itself. And we're going to talk today about what we're calling the conflict triangle, which is, in this case, Russia, Ukraine, and the United States. That is three actors, three agendas, and no clear path to resolution. Before we continue, obviously, we do not really care what the EU has to say because it is busy trying to nip around and get whatever scraps it can out of these other conflicts before it is considered entirely irrelevant and or overcome with militant Islam. So that was our preface to that, why the EU vision isn't in there, because nobody cares. So most people see Ukraine, the Ukraine conflict, as a binary conflict. Russia invaded, Ukraine resists, the West supports. It's very simple, right? But that is not the reality anymore, especially not as of April 24th, Friday, 10:14 a.m. This war has evolved into a three-sided strategic problem. And whether you want to deal with this or not, where the United States is not just a supporter, but an active force shaping the battlefield, the economy, and the outcome. And this brings in the complications. On one side, and we're talking in the United States, on one side, you have the US Congress, loves Ukraine, wants to fund it, wants to give them weapons, sustaining the war effort, probably a lot of USAID type shenanigans going on, which we'll never be able to investigate fully. And on the other side, you have the Trump administration looking for a negotiated settlement, trying to find ways to de escalate and potentially even reshape relations with Russia. This is all out there in the news. So, what's happening? The United States is doing two things at once. It is fueling the war and trying to end the war. And that is not a strategy. That is called tension. Tension there. So now let's look at Russia. From the outside, it's projecting strength. It absorbs sanctions, it keeps fighting. But underneath that surface, something important has changed. Russia is no longer fully self-sufficient in this war. It is increasingly dependent upon Iran for drones, munitions, and production capacity. The Iranians make some very good drones. You got to give them credit where it's due. At the same time, Russia benefits from global instability, higher energy prices. The West is distracted, new financial pathways outside of the traditional system. Okay, so this is the paradox. The same war that weakens Russia militarily is helping it survive strategically. Think about that, right? And Ukraine isn't just fighting Russia, it's fighting for perception because Ukraine's survival depends on Western funding, political support, and a steady stream of weapons, which it may or may not sell to other people. That means Ukraine has to win, not just on the battlefield, but in the narrative. And as those of you who have wondered why there's no election, there will never be an election during war. They've already said that. So you are stuck with that president until this has a break. It has to show the situation in Ukraine progress, resilience, and momentum. There have to be breakouts. They have to crush 5 divisions of the Russians, stuff like that. When they were fighting in Kursk, don't ever underestimate the historical significance. Kursk is where the Red Army crushed the German war machine. So it had a lot to do with a lot of things there. Now, if the narrative breaks, the support for Ukraine can break with it. And this is where things get messy. Russia pushes its narrative, Ukraine pushes its narrative, and the United States sends mixed signals depending on if Trump's allowed to get anything out in the media, plus whatever the legacy media and the Democrats and socialists get out there. So you get conflicting reports, you get competing truths, you get constant uncertainty. And this isn't just propaganda, this is a battlefield, okay? Fourth and fifth generation warfare is greatly at play in this war that we're dealing with, this conflict. And it's one where speed matters more than accuracy. And perception often outruns the reality of the situation because once a narrative takes hold, it shapes decisions. Everyone goes around with their stupid little lapel pins for Ukraine in this Congress, right? Whether it's true or not, they could be sponsoring fascism. And I was waiting you to fill in the word there. And you wouldn't care because they're getting back at the Russians, who you don't know why they're even getting back at the Russians. Now, add Iran to the equation. The United States wants to pressure Iran, but Russia is relying on Iran for, as we said, weapons and other things. So what happens? Every move against Iran pushes Russia closer to Tehran. And any attempt to pull Russia away requires easing pressure somewhere else. So the strategy collapses into itself. You cannot isolate Iran and separate Russia from Iran at the same time. China would be similar, but we'll talk about China another time. So here's to the heart of the issue. There is no coherent end state. Ukraine wants full restoration. Russia wants leverage. The United States wants multiple outcomes, many of which conflict with each other because of who's playing favorites in what branch of the government. And that creates a system where every action that you're involved in is friction, and every objective undermines another objective, and no one can step away from this thing because it's gone too far. So why doesn't it resolve? Because none of the players can afford to lose. Ukraine can't lose support. It would be done. Their president would be in a pit someplace. Russia can't show weakness for the same type of reason. Putin would end up in a pit someplace. And the United States can't allow the collapse. Not that most of Congress shouldn't end up in a pit, but somehow it'll get blamed on Donald Trump, so it wouldn't matter. So the war continues not because it's working, but because stopping it is even more dangerous. If you believe that, it's more dangerous to stop it than to allow it to continue. The most brutal trench warfare since World War I, and nobody is in an inclined situation, except for the Trump administration, it seems, to stop it from happening. Now, this isn't just a war of strength. It is a test of coherence. And right now, coherence is in rather short supply. The conflict triangle isn't stable. It's strained, and systems like this don't resolve cleanly. They endure until something breaks. So that's what we're dealing with there. And there'll be ways that we can talk later on. We have to watch some resolution. Today's Friday, April 24th. Once again, I have to say it because I was criticized about some statements we made on the Hormuz situation, but we had made them prior to the blockade and things like that. Read the dates, guys. Read the dates on these things. We try to stay timely. If you're trying to catch us on some shit from 3 weeks ago, the world changes. We evolve. We are not black and white here. So there you go. Have a good weekend. But think about this, because there is no black and white warfare anymore. Hasn't been for probably 1,000 years. But we don't pretend. If you pretend it's going to happen that way, you're in for a lot of disappointment. And it's just, it will boggle the mind at how many ties there are anymore, economically, politically, even the finances. It's very involved. We just try to give you an overview because no one's paying us the big money to give you the full report, but you get the idea. So that is all. Have a good day and have a nice weekend. Goodbye.